Imagine a young farm boy from rural America who never dreamed of being a hero. At 24, he became the greatest American flying ace of all time, single-handedly shooting down 40 Japanese planes in the skies over the Pacific. His story is so extraordinary it reads like fiction, yet every detail is true. This is Major Richard Ira Bong, the crazy farm boy who changed the course of World War II. Stay until the end to discover the tragic fate that awaited him after surviving the bloodiest war in history. Richard Ira Bong was born on September 24, 1920, on a small farm in Poplar, Wisconsin. He was the eldest of 9 children in a family of Swedish immigrants who worked hard farming the land. Life on the farm was simple, but steeped in values such as discipline, hard work, and humility. From a young age, Dick, as his family called him, demonstrated an insatiable curiosity for machines. He spent hours disassembling and reassembling tractors, engines, and any other equipment he could find on the farm. His father, Carl Bong, used to say that the boy had grease in his veins instead of blood. Little Poplar had fewer than 500 inhabitants. Children attended one-room rural schools, where all grades learned together. Dick was an average student, not particularly brilliant academically, but extremely skilled with his hands. His teachers noted that he struggled with theory, but when it came to practical application, no one could surpass him. In 1938, at age 18, Dick enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, now known as the University of Wisconsin-Superior. He planned to become a physical education teacher, following a safe and predictable path for a young man from the countryside. But fate had other plans. It was during college that Dick first encountered aviation. The U.S. government had created the Civilian Pilot Training Program, an initiative to train pilots in case war loomed. Dick signed up out of pure curiosity, little imagining that the decision would change his life forever. During his first flying lessons, something extraordinary happened. The young farmer, who could barely pass algebra, demonstrated an impressive natural talent for piloting. His instructors were astonished by his ability to feel the aircraft, to understand its limits and possibilities as if it were an extension of his own body. Dick graduated from the civilian program in 1941, months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He was about to begin his teaching career when the world plunged into chaos. On December 7, 1941, news of the attack reached Little Poplar like a bolt of lightning. Japan had bombed the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, killing more than 2,400 Americans and destroying much of the Pacific Fleet. 4 days later, Dick made the decision that would define his legacy. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, leaving behind his plans to teach children in a rural school. His mother, Dora Bong, wept as he left, clutching her eldest son with a broken heart. She knew that war consumed young men like him, but there was something different about Dick Bong, a rare combination of natural ability, superhuman reflexes, and an unshakable calm under pressure. Traits that would soon make him the most lethal fighter pilot America has ever produced. The farm boy was about to become a legend. Richard Bong's Air Force training was marked by an incident that nearly ended his career before it began. During an advanced training flight in 1942, he decided to make a low pass over his girlfriend's house in San Francisco. Extremely low. Witnesses reported that Bong's P-38 Lightning flew so close to rooftops that people could see his face through the cockpit. He literally flew between buildings, an insane maneuver that violated every conceivable safety rule. But it didn't stop there. The following week, he flew under the Golden Gate Bridge, a feat that defied both death and military regulations. His superiors were furious. Commander George Kenney, who would later become his staunchest defender, wrote in his official report that the young pilot was either completely insane or possessed extraordinary abilities. Perhaps both. Instead of expelling him, Kenny imposed a creative punishment. Bong was ordered to teach aerobatics lessons to junior cadets. The punishment proved to be a blessing in disguise. By repeatedly teaching extreme maneuvers, Bong perfected techniques that would later save his life in combat. He learned every limit of the P-38 Lightning, the twin-engine aircraft that would become his lethal weapon in the skies over the Pacific. The P-38 was an extraordinary machine. With two 1,475 horsepower Allison engines, it could reach speeds exceeding 660 kilometers per hour. Its unique configuration, with engines at the wingtips and the cockpit in the center, gave the pilot exceptional visibility. It was armed with four 50-caliber machine guns and a 20-millimeter cannon, all concentrated in the nose of the aircraft. Bong fell in love with the P-38. Unlike other pilots who complained about its complexity, he devoted hours to studying every system, every quirk of the machine. He developed an almost symbiotic relationship with the aircraft, understanding its sounds, vibrations, and temperament. In September 1942, Bong was deployed to the Southwest Pacific Theater of Operations. Attached to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, he arrived at Port Moresby, New Guinea, a forward base operating in primitive conditions. The heat was stifling, tropical diseases were decimating the troops, and Japanese attacks were constant. His first combat mission took place on December 27, 1942. Bong was on a patrol over Buna when he spotted formations of Japanese bombers escorted by Zero fighters. His heart raced, but his hands remained steady on the controls. What happened next surprised even the most experienced pilots. Bong dove through the enemy escort, positioned himself perfectly behind a Zero, and opened fire at near-suicidal range. The Japanese fighter exploded in a ball of flames. His first victory. In the same engagement, he shot down another Zero using a maneuver that defied the tactical manuals. Instead of pursuing the enemy in a tight turn, where the agile Zero had the advantage, Bong used the P-38's superior speed to position himself and fire in short, accurate bursts. That day, the Wisconsin farmer proved he belonged in the sky. But that was just the beginning of a career that would rewrite the history books of military aviation. Richard Bong wasn't the most spectacular pilot in the squadron. He didn't perform dazzling aerobatics or risk impossible maneuvers in combat. His genius lay in the brutal simplicity of his approach. While other pilots tried to outmaneuver the Japanese Zeros in traditional dogfights, Bong developed a different philosophy. Close, fire, stay away, he said. 3 simple principles that challenged the romanticization of aerial duels. Bong didn't see aerial combat as chivalry or sport. He saw it as work, and work should be done efficiently. The Japanese Zero fighters were extraordinary machines, extremely agile. They could turn in impossible circles and climb like rockets. But they had fatal weaknesses: light armor, unprotected fuel tanks, and a fragile structure. The P-38 Lightning was the opposite: heavy, heavily armed, but less maneuverable. Bong understood that victory didn't mean outmatching the enemy's own strengths, but exploiting their weaknesses. He obsessively studied combat reports, noting Japanese pilot behavior patterns and identifying repeated mistakes. His preferred tactic became known as boom and zoom. Bong used the P-38's superior altitude and speed to dive down on the Zeros, fire at high speed, and climb back up before they could react. He never allowed himself to be drawn into circling combat where the Zero had the advantage. During missions, while other pilots scattered chasing individual targets, Bong maintained iron discipline. He would choose a target, execute the attack, and withdraw to reassess. This methodical approach allowed him to survive while racking up victories. In March 1943, Bong achieved his 5th confirmed aerial victory, officially becoming a flying ace. But he was just warming up. In the following months, his kill count grew impressively: 7 victories in April, 10 in May, and 15 in July. What set Bong apart was his ability to learn from each combat. He kept a notebook where he recorded details of each engagement: angle of approach, firing distance, enemy reaction, mistakes made. It was a scientific approach to what many considered art or instinct. His squadron mates began to notice something peculiar. Bong rarely returned with significant damage to his aircraft. While other pilots returned riddled with bullets, Bong's P-38 remained virtually intact. It wasn't luck. It was precision in avoiding unnecessary risk. General George Kenney, commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, was fascinated by the young pilot. In his memoirs, Kenney wrote, "Bong was not reckless. He was calculating. Every move had purpose. Every shot had intent. But Bong's efficiency came at an emotional cost. Unlike pilots who boasted of their victories, he rarely spoke of the men he had killed. In letters home, he mentioned only that he was doing his job. His mother sensed something between the lines, a sadness that words couldn't express." By September 1943, at age 23, Richard Bong had shot down 21 enemy planes, becoming the highest-scoring American ace of the war. And there was still a long way to go. The spring of 1943 marked the most intense period of the Bong campaign. Allied forces advanced across New Guinea, and every kilometer was fought with blood. The Japanese resisted fiercely, and air control was absolutely crucial to the success of ground operations. Bong flew almost daily, sometimes multiple missions in a single day. Bomber escort, fighter patrols, ground attacks. He never turned down a mission, even when he could legitimately rest. There was something in him that couldn't stand still while men fought. On April 12, 1943, Bong participated in one of the largest air battles of the Pacific Theater. 50 P-38 Lightnings engaged a similarly sized Japanese formation over Huon Gulf. The sky was a chaos of tracers, explosions, and burning machines falling to their deaths. Eyewitnesses reported that Bong remained calm as all hell broke loose around him. He singled out a zero, pursuing an Allied P-38, methodically positioned himself, and fired a devastating burst. The zero disintegrated in mid-air. Seconds later, he shot down another that was trying to escape by diving. In that battle, Bong saved the lives of at least 3 Allied pilots who were in desperate situations. He had a knack for appearing at the right time, in the right place. His colleagues began calling him Guardian Angel, but it wasn't all victory. In June 1943, Bong nearly died when his P-38 was hit by Japanese anti-aircraft fire during a low-altitude attack. The left engine was destroyed, and he had to fly more than 200 kilometers over enemy territory with only one engine working. The situation was desperate. The P-38 could barely maintain altitude, and Japanese fighters were in pursuit. Bong threw away everything he could to reduce weight: ammunition, radio equipment, even his survival kit. He flew so low over the ocean that his wing almost touched the waves. Miraculously, he reached Allied territory and landed on a makeshift runway. When he exited the aircraft, his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. Mechanics counted more than 40 bullet and shrapnel hits in the fuselage. Any one of them could have been fatal. That experience changed something in Bong. He realized that skill and strategy didn't guarantee survival. There was always an element of luck, of randomness that no pilot could control. This awareness made him even more careful, even more disciplined. In July 1943, Bong was promoted to Major, an exceptionally rapid progression. With 24 confirmed victories, he had surpassed the record of Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, the top American ace of World War I. The American press began covering his exploits, transforming the Wisconsin farmer into a national hero. But fame didn't change Bong. He continued writing simple letters home, asking about the harvest and his younger brothers. For him, shooting down enemy planes wasn't heroism. It was duty. True heroism, he said, lay in the infantrymen who fought in the mud and blood. October 1943 brought the most dangerous encounter of Bong's career. He faced an extraordinarily skilled Japanese pilot, possibly a veteran of the early days of the war. The duel took place over Rabaul, the most heavily defended Japanese stronghold in the South Pacific. Bong was leading a patrol of 4 P-38s when they encountered a formation of Zeros escorting bombers. The fight began with the Allied advantage, but quickly descended into chaos. One particular Zero, flown with exceptional skill, began shooting down P-38s with deadly accuracy. Bong immediately recognized he was facing someone different. The movements were calculated, the maneuvers were perfect, and the Japanese pilot clearly understood the P-38's limitations. It was like looking in a mirror, encountering an enemy who thought exactly like him. The duel lasted almost 15 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat. Both pilots tried to gain an advantage, but the other always had a response. Bong would dive, the Zero would follow. Bong would climb, the Zero would anticipate. It was three-dimensional chess played at 600 kilometers per hour. Bong's ammunition was running low. He had perhaps 20 seconds of fire remaining. He needed a perfect shot, or he would have to flee, something that hurt his professional pride. It was then that he made a bold decision that completely contradicted his tactical principles. Bong deliberately placed himself in a vulnerable position, feigning a rookie mistake. He let the P-38's nose lift too much in a turn, as if it had lost speed. The Japanese pilot took the bait and dove into attack, positioning himself exactly where Bong had predicted, in a move rehearsed 1,000 times. Bong inverted the P-38 in a physics-defying maneuver, aligning the aircraft's nose with the Zero approaching. Both fired simultaneously. For a split second, the two aircraft's traces intertwined in the air. The Zero exploded. One of its wings tore off, and the aircraft entered a death spiral. Bong briefly saw the pilot eject, the parachute opening as he fell toward the jungle. But the P-38 had also been hit. The hydraulic system was failing, and black smoke was beginning to pour from the right engine. Bong shut down the damaged engine and began the long journey back to base. Every minute felt like an hour. The smoke was growing, and he could feel the heat rising in the cabin. If the fire spread, he would have to bail out over Japanese-held territory. He managed to reach an Allied forward base, but the runway was too short for a normal approach. Bong had to make an emergency landing without hydraulic brakes, using only the engines to control speed. The aircraft came to a stop just meters from the end of the runway, so damaged it was deemed beyond repair. When mechanics inspected the P-38, they found 3 bullet impacts inches from the fuel tank. One of them had passed through the cockpit, inches from Bong's head. He had won the duel, but by an incalculable margin. That night, for the first time in months, Bong couldn't sleep. In December 1943, Richard Bong returned to the United States for a brief leave of absence. America needed heroes, and the 23-year-old pilot had become the face of the Pacific campaign. He visited aircraft factories, participated in war bond sales, and gave interviews to the press. But Bong was uncomfortable with the fame. During a press conference in Los Angeles, a reporter asked how he felt about being America's greatest flying ace. Bong replied, "I'd rather be back with my guys. They do the real work." While on leave, he met Marjorie Vattendahl, a young woman of Swedish descent who worked as a librarian in Superior, Wisconsin. It was love at first sight. Marjorie was intelligent, compassionate, and completely indifferent to Bong's fame. She loved him for the shy farmer he was deep down, not the war hero the press had created. They began exchanging letters daily. In his messages to Marjorie, Bong revealed vulnerabilities he had never shared with anyone. He spoke of the fear he felt before each mission, of the faces of the Japanese pilots who pursued their dreams, of the guilt of being alive while so many had died. In February 1944, Bong returned to the Pacific, but now with a purpose beyond the war. He wanted to survive. He wanted to return to Marjorie. This motivation, paradoxically, made him more dangerous in the air. Pilots fighting to survive are more cautious, more precise, more lethal. By April 1944, Bong had achieved 27 victories, officially surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker as the greatest American flying ace of all time. General Douglas MacArthur personally awarded Bong the Congressional Medal of Honor, America's highest military distinction. At the ceremony, MacArthur said, "Major Bong, you are a credit to your race, your family, and your country. Future generations will speak of your exploits with admiration and gratitude." Bong, characteristically uncomfortable, replied only, "Thank you, sir." But the record didn't satisfy Bong. He continued flying missions, now officially designated as a combat instructor, though in practice he remained a frontline pilot. Between May and December 1944, he added 13 more victories to his impressive tally. On December 17, 1944, during an escort mission over the Philippines, Bong shot down his 40th and last enemy aircraft. It was a Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighter attempting to intercept B-24 bombers. Bong hit it with a 3-second burst, and the Oscar crashed in flames over the Philippine jungle. 40 confirmed victories, a record that remains unbeaten to this day, more than 80 years later. No American pilot has ever approached that number. Bong had redefined what it meant to be an ace pilot, but the price had been high. Bong weighed 15 kilograms less than when he arrived in the Pacific. His hair had begun to gray at the age of 24. Nightmares tormented him every night. He'd won 40 duels with death, but each victory had taken a piece of his soul. In January 1945, General George Kenney made a difficult decision. He ordered Richard Bong to return permanently to the United States. Officially, it was so Bong could serve as an instructor and spokesman for the Air Force. Unofficially, Kenney knew Bong's luck was running out. No one can defy death 40 times and expect the 41st to be any different, Kenney wrote in his personal diary. Bong deserves to live. He deserves to have a life after this damned war. Bong was torn. Part of him wanted to stay with his men, to keep fighting until the end of the war. But another part, the part that wrote passionate letters to Marjorie, longed to go home, to a normal life, to peace. The trip back to the United States took 3 days, with stops at several Pacific islands. At each stop, Bong was recognized and celebrated. Soldiers asked for autographs. Generals wanted to shake his hand. Reporters asked endless questions. He smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. When he finally arrived in San Francisco in February 1945, a crowd of thousands awaited him. Bands played, confetti fell, and politicians gave grand speeches. Bong remained on the platform, uncomfortable with all the attention, thinking only of reaching Wisconsin. On February 10, 1945, Richard Bong and Marjorie Vattendahl were married in a simple ceremony in Superior, Wisconsin. It was exactly the kind of event Bong wanted. Small, intimate, with only family and close friends in attendance. No spotlights or military propaganda. In the weeks that followed, Bong tried to adapt to civilian life. He visited his family in Poplar, worked on the farm with his father, and tried to find normalcy in the routine he had left behind 4 years earlier. But something had irreversibly changed. He no longer fit into that simple world. The nightmares worsened. Marjorie would wake in the middle of the night to find her husband sitting on the porch, staring up at the starry sky, clearly somewhere else. He spoke little about what he had experienced, but the emotional scars were evident. In March 1945, the Air Force assigned Bong to a new role, test pilot. He would be responsible for evaluating new jet fighters, a revolutionary technology that promised to make propeller-driven aircraft obsolete. It was a prestigious, relatively secure position that would allow him to continue flying. Bong accepted the assignment with renewed enthusiasm. Flying was all he knew how to do. In the air, he felt complete, in control, alive. On the ground, he was just a man haunted by memories he couldn't share. The war in the Pacific was heading towards its violent end. In April, Bong learned of Franklin Roosevelt's death and felt profound sadness. In May, Germany surrendered. In August, atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, finally forcing Japan's surrender. World War II was over. Richard Bong had survived. At 24, he had his whole life ahead of him. A loving wife, a promising career, the gratitude of a nation. The future seemed bright and full of possibilities, But fate, cruel and relentless, had other plans for the greatest American flying ace. In August 1945, Richard Bong was at Burbank Air Force Base in California, testing a revolutionary new jet fighter, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. It was the next generation of fighter aircraft, capable of speeds exceeding 900 kilometers per hour. Far beyond any propeller-driven aircraft, the P-80 was a fascinating but complex machine. Unlike the piston engines Bong knew intimately, the jet engine was a new technology, with completely different characteristics and limitations. Test pilots had to learn an entirely new way of flying. Bong had only completed 22 hours of flight time in the P-80, a time considered insufficient to fully master the aircraft. But he was Richard Bong, America's greatest ace. If anyone could quickly master a new aircraft, it was he. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the same day the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bong prepared for a routine test flight. Marjorie was in Wisconsin visiting family. He had spoken to her on the phone the night before, making plans to meet again that weekend. At 2:30 p.m., Bong took off in P-80 aircraft number 4485048. The takeoff was normal. He climbed to approximately 400 meters and began performing basic test maneuvers. Observers on the ground reported that everything appeared routine. Then, just 5 minutes after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The P-80's engine suddenly and catastrophically failed. Eyewitnesses saw the aircraft begin to lose altitude rapidly. Bong attempted to return to the runway, but he was too low and too slow. Following standard training, Bong attempted to eject. But the P-80's first-generation ejection system was notoriously problematic. Either it failed completely, or Bong was at insufficient altitude for the parachute to deploy properly. The P-80 crashed in an open field a few kilometers from the base. The aircraft exploded on impact, creating a fireball visible for miles. Richard Ira Bong died instantly. He was 24 years, 10 months, and 13 days old. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. America's greatest flying ace, the man who had survived countless dogfights against elite Japanese pilots, had died on a routine test flight over American soil. The news reached Marjorie by phone. She was helping her mother in the kitchen when the ringing sounded. When she heard the words, her knees buckled and she fell to the floor, phone still in hand. Her husband, the love of her life, had left just 6 months after their wedding. The Bong family in Poplar received the news via an official telegram. Carl Bong, Richard's father, read the words silently, then walked to the barn and cried alone. His mother, Dora, never fully recovered. She kept Richard's room exactly as he had left it, preserving every detail as a shrine. The tragedy of Bong's death was magnified by its cruel irony. He had defied death 40 times in the hostile skies of the Pacific, faced the best pilots of the Japanese Empire, survived catastrophic damage to his aircraft, and returned home a hero, only to die in a peacetime test accident. Subsequent investigation revealed that the P-80's engine had suffered a fuel pump failure, a known but not fully resolved defect. The low altitude and reduced speed during the tests did not give Bong enough time to react adequately. Some engineers suggested that Bong, accustomed to the P-38's reliable piston engines, may have underestimated the risks of the new jet engines. Others argued that the faulty ejection system was the real culprit. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. Richard Bong's funeral took place in Poplar, Wisconsin, on August 11, 1945. Thousands of people attended, including generals, politicians, and war veterans. General George Kenney delivered the eulogy, struggling to control his emotions as he spoke of the young pilot who had served under his command. Dick Bong was the embodiment of the best of American youth, Kenney said. Brave without being reckless, lethal without being cruel, famous without being arrogant. He fought not for glory, but because it was his duty. And now, when peace has finally come, we have been deprived of his presence. Marjorie Vatndal Bong never remarried. She dedicated the rest of her life to preserving her husband's memory. working with museums and historians. She died in 2003 at the age of 79 and was buried next to Richard. Richard Bong's death shocked the American nation. Newspaper headlines across the country mourned the loss of the country's greatest aviation hero. President Harry Truman issued an official statement calling Bong one of the most brilliant pilots who ever lived, and ordered flags flown at half-staff at military installations. But Bong's true legacy goes far beyond headlines and decorations. He fundamentally redefined what it meant to be a fighter pilot. His methodical, disciplined, and calculated approach influenced generations of military pilots. In the decades that followed, Bong's tactics were studied at military academies around the world. His principle of approach, shoot, and retreat became standard doctrine for aerial combat. Instructors cited his methods when teaching new pilots tactical discipline and lethal efficiency. In 1950, the United States Air Force, now an independent branch of the military, named its main base in Wisconsin Richard Ira Bong Air Force Base in his honor. The base operated until 1977, training thousands of pilots who carried Bong's principles into future conflicts. Monuments have been erected in his memory. In Superior, Wisconsin, a bridge over Lake Superior was named the Richard I Bong Memorial Bridge. In Poplar, his hometown, a museum dedicated to his life preserves his uniforms, medals, and personal letters. The P-38 Lightning that Bong flew during many of his missions has been restored and is on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The aircraft, painted in Bong's original colors and bearing the name Marge on the nose in honor of his wife, is one of the museum's most visited attractions. Veterans who served with Bong spoke of him with reverence mixed with affection. "He never made you feel inferior," a former squadron mate recalled in 1985. "He was the best of all of us, but he never acted like it. He treated mechanics with the same respect he treated generals." The Bong family kept his memory alive through generations. His younger brothers, aged between 8 and 16 when he died, shared stories of their older brother who repaired tractors and dreamed of adventure. To them, Richard was never the legendary ace. He was just Dick, the brother who taught them to fish and defended them from bullies. Military historians debate what would have happened if Bong had survived. Some speculate that he might have become a general, shaping Air Force doctrine during the Cold War. Others suggest he would have returned to the quiet life he always wanted, perhaps as a teacher or a farmer. Marjorie Bong offered her own perspective in a 1995 interview. 50 years after her husband's death, Dick never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to do his job, come home, and live a simple life. The war made him a hero, but all he really wanted was peace. Richard Bong's record of 40 victories remains unbeaten. No American pilot has ever approached that number. And with the changing nature of modern aerial warfare, it's unlikely anyone will. When we look at the life of Richard Ira Bong, it's impossible not to reflect on the extraordinary contradictions that defined his existence. He was a young farmer who became America's most lethal aerial warrior, a gentleman who killed 40 adversaries, a national hero who simply wanted to return home. What made Bong so exceptional wasn't just his skill as a pilot, though that was undoubtedly extraordinary. It was his ability to remain human in circumstances that destroy humanity. In letters preserved at the Bong Museum, we see a man constantly questioning the meaning of his actions, searching for purpose beyond the tally of victories. In a particularly revealing letter written to his father in July 1944, Bong wrote, "Father, every time I shoot down a plane, I think there is a man inside, someone with a family, with dreams, with people who love him. I do it because I have to, because it is my duty to protect our men. But I never celebrate. Every victory is also a tragedy." These words reveal the moral depth of a man who could easily have been consumed by the adrenaline and glory of combat. Bong understood that war is not a sport, that killing is not a conquest, that survival is not a triumph. It was simply the inevitable result of dire circumstances. Bong's tactical approach revolutionized aerial combat in ways that still resonate today. Before him, many pilots viewed aerial duels as extensions of medieval chivalry. There was a dangerous romanticization of the honorable dogfight, the clean duel between worthy adversaries. Bong demolished this notion. He understood that in war the goal is not to fight honorably, but to win efficiently. His philosophy of maximizing advantages and minimizing risks saved countless Allied lives. Pilots who adopted his methods had significantly higher survival rates. Their instructors in modern military academies teach the Bong principle. Use your advantages, avoid the enemies, never fight fair when you can fight smart. It's a philosophy that transcends aviation and applies to military strategy in general. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Bong's legacy is how it challenges our notions of heroism. We live in a culture that glorifies warriors, that transforms soldiers into superheroes, that romanticizes violence when perpetrated by good guys. Bong rejected all of this. He never considered himself a hero. In every interview, every public appearance, he redirected praise to others. The real heroes, he insisted, were the infantrymen in the mud, the medics saving lives under enemy fire, the engineers building bridges under bombardment. He was just a pilot doing his job. This genuine humility, combined with extraordinary competence, created a figure who transcends simplistic nationalism. Bong didn't fight out of abstract ideology or hatred of the enemy. He fought because men he knew and respected needed protection. His motivations were personal and human, not political or philosophical. Bong's untimely death adds a tragic layer to his legacy. He survived the bloodiest war in history, only to die in a preventable accident. There's something profoundly unfair about this, a cruelty of fate that feels almost Shakespearean, but perhaps there's a lesson here too. Bong dedicated himself completely to the cause of defeating fascism and protecting his comrades. He risked everything, repeatedly, for something greater than himself. And when the war ended, he continued serving, testing aircraft to make flying safer for future generations. His death was not in vain. The P-80 failure that killed him led to significant improvements in jet propulsion systems and ejection mechanisms. Future pilots lived because Richard Bong died. There's a quiet heroism in this, a sacrifice that never made headlines but saved lives. Today, more than 80 years after his death, Richard Bong remains the highest-scoring ace in American military history. His record not only survives, but will likely never be broken. The nature of aerial warfare has fundamentally changed. Modern combat is fought at long range with guided missiles, not in close-quarters duels with machine guns. But Bong's legacy transcends numbers. He represents something fundamental about the American character at its best: the ability of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when called upon. The humility to remain connected to one's roots, no matter the circumstances. The wisdom to understand that competence does not justify arrogance. World War II veterans are disappearing rapidly. Within a few years, there will be no one left alive who served with Bong, who heard his stories firsthand, who knew the man behind the legend. But his lessons remain relevant. We live in turbulent times, where heroism is often confused with bravado, where strength is mistakenly associated with aggression. Richard Bong reminds us that true strength comes from discipline, that true heroism includes humility, that true courage is often silent. He was the crazy farm boy who single-handedly destroyed 40 Japanese planes. But more importantly, he was the young man who never forgot where he came from, who treated everyone with respect, who questioned the meaning of his own actions, who loved deeply and was loved deeply. Richard Ira Bong wasn't just an exceptional pilot, he was an exceptional man who flew. And therein lies all the difference. His story isn't just about aerial victories or military records. It's about maintaining humanity when the world around us crumbles into violence. It's about doing the impossible while remaining firmly connected to what truly matters. The farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, soared higher than anyone could have imagined. And when he fell, he left a legacy that continues to inspire generations. Not because he was invincible, but because he was human. Deeply, complicatedly, and tragically human. End.